A little bit more developer support. Two features on the screen. The first is that we are now able to support bitmasks on generic forms. What are generic forms? Please remember, generic forms are forms you typically use to show data in custom created tables, or you use to show standard data out of standard tables, but in a completely different sort order and tabbing. These forms in the past was not able to show bitmasks. That means fields who just allow two things. First of all, they store numeric values instead of the clear text you can see in the drop-down field. And secondly, because of the bitmask feature, you can select more than one options and you will get at the end then back a specific numeric value, which allows you easily to identify which options was checked. The second feature on the screen, it's according to the database compiler command line tool. We do have, as you may remember, a command line database compiler. This compiler was not able in the past to do what the standard compiler is doing. That means the standard compiler asks you for which parts of the environment should be compiled, and you can select or deselect options to speed up the complete compilation process. Remember, if you just uncheck process compilation because there was no process modified, then the whole thing is much faster than with the processes, because to compile the processes takes more or less the longest time. Whatever. Now the DB command compiler allows as well to skip specific tasks. Therefore, you can add that into the XML configuration file of the DB compiler command line tool. And with that, you can now speed up this tool as well. An extension of the Object API, not in the demo, just here in a slide. It's a new enhanced IEntityWalker. These things are normally used just to grab a value from another object related to the object I'm just started on. In the old version, all the time we was interested in more than one value from another object. It was necessary to create 2 and more lines of code. Each line was just getting back one value of a related object related to that object I was started with. In version 8 and above, there is a new way to use the object walker in a way of that you get, based on a property on the current object, from the related object, the full object back. Again, in the past, it was possible with the object walker to get one value from a related object. Now it is possible to get the complete object back. And therefore exists a new method on the entity walker, and that thing it's the IEntityWalker.getEntity. Or if you want to handle null values as well, then the try get entity. You might remember that business process somewhere starts to request for a resource. The approval workflow starts. Some people start to approve. Some others are missing. And then during the approval workflow, an administrator just changes the workflow or modifies the workflow in the system. In the old pre-version 8, on Identity Manager installations, there was just 2 options for that. Option number 1 was that the complete request was aborted in a way of that the user was forced to start the complete process again. And the second option was just to reset the workflow in a way that everything that was decided was completely wasted and the new workflow was starting. This was difficult, especially in situations where a workflow was just modified and only a little bit modified because the system was not able to decide if this modification was a major or important modification or not. The second problem with this behavior was that the complete thing was only to configure with the help of one configuration parameter and was then suitable for, on the one hand side, resource requests and on the other hand side, attestation cases. Remember, for attestation and for requesting things, the same workflows can be used. With version 8, we are here much more detailed. First of all, we created 2 configuration parameters. One configuration parameter configures now the update behavior for requests. The other configuration parameter, it's doing that for attestation. Secondly, we differed the scenarios On the one hand side, the approval workflow update. That means a current assigned approval workflow gets updated. And the other scenario where a completely new approval workflow will be assigned. For the update of the approval workflow, you can now configure one of these configuration parameters, and in the meantime exists exactly 3 values for each of these configuration parameters. The first values are doing the same than before. There's an abort scenario where the complete request gets aborted. There is on the other hand side a reset scenario where the workflow gets resetted and starts from the scratch. A third option exists now as well, and this is the scenario to continue. That means with version 8 of the Identity Manager, people in this situation are now able to continue their old workflow. That means if a workflow was just started in the past and the change happens on the workflow side, the old workflow will be used. That means the system remembers the old workflow and continues with the old workflow so that people started with the old workflow can finish the old workflow. You can configure that for attestation and for IT shop things separately, but you can only configure that one way for any cases of a specific type. That means there's one configuration possible for the IT shop issues and there's one configuration possible for attestation. You cannot start workflow-wise to assign a different behavior. Now let's talk about the second scenario. In this big scenario, we first talked about to upgrade a specific existing workflow. In the second option, we are talking about to change a workflow. That means you just drop an existing workflow and you assign another workflow to a specific resource or to a specific attestation policy. If you do so, in the past, it was handled in the same way then for the request and for the update. Now we have 2 more configuration parameters. Remember, my first configuration parameters was just for an update scenario. Now we have 2 more configuration parameters for a workflow assignment scenario. And we differ as well between attestation and IT shop, so that could be separately configured. And the new available behaviors for that will be pretty similar. First of all, an abort that will says all open requests or all open attestation cases will be closed. And yeah, the attestation cases have to be recreated on a schedule and the requests have to be requested again from some users. The other option is a reset, which means that all the started workflows gets closed and the complete decisions have to be made again. And with continue, we can do the same than before. We can just continue with the old workflows. Yeah, and this is pretty interesting because something like that we have never had in the product. People are now able to get their resources on the basis of an old, not valid workflow anymore, of a really old workflow, of a different workflow. And that is what this change allows us. With that, we really hope that the business is now more happy than before because nearly every it's possible. A good message from my perspective is that this could now as well be handled separately. For each of these behaviors we have described, we have now 4 configuration parameters to configure, 2 for update, attestation and requests, and 2 for the workflow assignment as well, attestation and request. And I think we should now have enough grades to configure exactly the right thing for our customers.